Hello, everyone. This is Bill Apter, and welcome to another edition of my video magazine. And this week is totally different than any other edition we've done. As you know, in the magazines, we did a regular magazine each month, or a few each month, and then we had special editions. This one is a special edition. The length of this edition will not be as long as the usual ones. By the way, if you're noticing the bald heads, it's not in homage to me. My masks are still with Awesome Wrestling Entertainment for booking me at WrestleCon. It was a horrible day yesterday. The great Bruno Sammartino died. And there were a lot of tributes to him, including one from me. And also, I don't want to pass by that Paul Jones died as well. And Paul was a very good friend. He was quite a character. And just a phone call I can't take at the moment. He was quite a character and a great wrestler. If I remember right, he's the guy who threw the Florida Championship belt into Tampa Bay. Anyway, Larry ZBYSZKO has not talked to many people. He was mentored by Bruno Sammartino. He was one of Bruno Sammartino's closest friends and one of the greatest storylines in the world when he was an enemy of Bruno Sammartino. Let's get Larry on the phone. I did tell him we'd be calling, and I'm not ignoring you people in the chat room here, by the way. I want to do our interview here.
Hello.
Larry ZBYSZKO. It's Bill Apter as promised. 7:02. I'm 2 minutes late. I'm sorry.
Shame on you.
We are live. I'm on video. You're on audio, but you should be on video as well. But you're on live audio video. So welcome to the Apter chat. I was just telling my audience here that yesterday, one of the saddest days personally and professionally for you, for me, and a lot of other people, and that was losing Bruno Sammartino. How did you first hear about it, Larry?
Well, it was it's just Bill. It's sad. I knew Bruno was in the hospital a while and things weren't going good. But Bruno was such a larger than life character and guy and a man in my life who let my dream come true. And I just never thought he would even die.
You me either. I thought he would always be there.
He just always would be there, and if I called, I would talk, just nothing would change. It was a sad shocker.
Yeah. Now when people mention to you, and it's the general question, and of course I'll ask you this, is if there's one moment in that relationship with Bruno Sammartino professionally that you remember best, what was it? Professionally.
Oh God, a lot of it.
Yeah. Of course, I would think it would be the Shea Stadium.
Well, there's a whole story around Shea Stadium that would take an hour to tell, but that was definitely one of the biggies, and an exciting time and a wild time and a successful time. And when you look back at history, you can kind of look at that, which was the last of the old school feuds, and it marked kind of a milestone when the old school kind of ended and a new era of national TV and pay-per-view was started again.
Now, you, I'm going to use the old term, you stabbed Bruno in the back. We said that in the magazines. And there were times that you needed police escorts to get you out of buildings, didn't you?
Oh yeah, I had to hide in trunks in the cars and get snuck out. But there was riots, and I got stabbed, I got shot at. I mean, and that reflected how much the people loved Bruno. They loved him so much that I've seen matches where Bruno would start bleeding and fall to the mat, and 4 or 5 people would get heart attacks and die in the audience.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, Bruno was truly loved. He was the kind of guy, and his real personality and his utility came across over TV, and to listen to him talk, and you know that's the real guy.
Bruno said on a lot of interviews that he never understood what compelled people to follow him. Yeah.
Well, that's probably the reason they followed him, because Bruno couldn't figure out why, because he was the real guy.
Yeah.
And he was, and you sit home and listen to him talk on TV, and you just knew what a humble, nice guy. And he looked like a gorilla. I mean, it was such an awesome look for those days.
He did. What, when the whole incident happened, people were asking me yesterday. I was on the Busted Open show this morning, and Bubba Ray Dudley asked me, he said, Bill, if you could think of one thing, one story about Bruno Sammartino that compelled you more than anything, what was it? And I said the ZBYSZKO angle. So when that happened, and you knew you were going to turn your back on Bruno Sammartino, what was the feeling at that point? Did you know that the reaction was going to be what it turned out to be?
Well, I didn't mean to do it. It just kind of happened. But I didn't realize that how serious people would take this.
Yeah.
I mean, after the TV showed, I drove up to some town, and there were fans there, and as I'm driving through the building to the back parking lot, rocks and bricks were smashing off my car. The police had to run out and get me in from the car. I mean, I was driving home that night in a brand new Cadillac with the windows were smashed, the mirror was banging, the lights were broke out. I mean, it was a cartoon. But you realize, these people love this guy so much that they would lose their minds, smash a car, whip out knives, throw whiskey bottles into the ring. That's how much emotion was there.
I have to tell you, in the magazines, when we did the most popular, most hated rankings, for months, you were number 1.
Oh, great.
Yeah. Did you ever, and because you started off as what we used to call a good guy, did you ever think that you would become a bad guy?
No, and not like that. Not in the good old days, But, it's funny because, I've been out to the Performance Center and talked to the younger guys starting out at the training. And I'll tell them the stories, like, about certain things in the riots. And they look at me and they go, yeah, be kidding, really? I mean, they can't fathom where this business came from. Like, unbelievable.
You talking about current people in the business?
Yeah, the young people training and getting in. You tell them what it was like, in the days of Bruno, and they can't imagine.
People get so...
You're ribbing?
You're right. They think you're ribbing. Right. Exactly. I mean, I remember being with Abdullah Farouk, the Grand Wizard, with the Sheik coming out of a building there, and I thought I was going to get murdered because I was walking with them. Back then, it was a totally different business. Now, so that leads me to this question: what happened with you and Bruno? If they did that today, not with you and Bruno, with, let's say, John Cena and someone else, do you think it would have the same impact, the same reaction?
You know what? I just don't see it. The world's different. The audience is different. And I don't know if I can see it. Boy, it would really have to be set up right. But I just don't think the audience today will get that emotionally involved because of the way it is. You know what I mean? Sure.
So the classic story, of course, and there are a lot of people out there watching the Apter chat that don't really know this. Bruno was your inspiration to break into the wrestling business, correct?
Oh yeah, he was my hero growing up in Pittsburgh, watching studio wrestling.
And I know this story, but tell us how you got to meet Bruno the first time.
Well, in a nutshell, I was 16, got my license, and I would drive the car and my piece of crap. And when I went in one direction, Bruno lived there, so I would turn off a block early and go down this road that went right past Bruno's house in his yard. But you couldn't see in his yard because there was these big giant hedges along the
I remember.
And one day, right before I got to the hedges for a second, I caught a glimpse of him in the summer standing up by his pool getting a tan. And I stopped the car and the gate was locked, so I crawled through the hedges. And I came up to the side full of twigs, hair all messed up, as if, and introduced myself. And
you just showed up at it. You just showed up at.
I just appeared.
Yeah. What was he shocked?
Oh yeah, I was looking at me. I couldn't figure out how he kept a straight face. There was this little stupid kid crawling through the hedges.
I mean, if it was today, he'd dial 911, of course.
Who knows?
So how did you establish the relationship from then on?
I was talking to him and very respectful, and and I was wrestling amateur, and he liked that. And then there's a couple other times I'd see him, I'd stop in, and and he realized how bad I wanted to be one. And I mean, here's a guy who was a big star, the number one in the business.
Yes.
And he didn't have to help me out. I mean, he didn't have. We live all the time on the road. You want to spend time with your family. Here's some kids. But I don't know why, but he did, and he didn't have to.
Yeah, you became one of his kids, didn't you?
Kinda.
Yeah. You sat at the dinner table and broke bread, and you were part of the family.
Well, sometimes. I mean, one time I'd always do something that would backfire, but I figured I got this Harley Davidson. I saw him press Bruno's up. I'm driving it up, and I see him in the backyard with some people, and I go storming across his backyard on my Harley. I almost hung myself on the clothesline. And but I didn't realize how many people were there. And he had like Chief Jay Strongbow was there, and Tony Parisi was there, and Danucci was there, and a bunch of guys. And he's looking at me like, "Why are you idiot riding this big bike around my Brixton Park?"
Trying to endear yourself to him, right?
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah. Did you travel with him during the days? Oh yeah. How hard was it not to travel with him during the days when you had the big feud with him?
I never traveled with him in those days.
Oh, I know that. I mean, but before then you used to travel with him. So now you're, yeah. So now you're enemy.
Well, I used to ride with him and Dominic, and whenever they didn't want me to know what they're talking about, they start speaking Italian.
Yes. I was in many dressing rooms when he and Dominic and Tony Parisi would start talking Italian until they wanted to let me in on what they were talking about.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely. So when was the last time you saw him?
Well, the last time I saw him was last year at WrestleMania in Orlando.
Yeah, I remember. I was there with the two of you. Yeah.
And then I talked to him maybe a few months ago, and shortly after I talked to him, he wound up in the hospital.
If you could write a book, this is a tough question a lot of times, but if you could write
give me tough questions, I appreciate it.
I'm going to give it to you. If you could write a book,
right.
You could write a book summing up Bruno Sammartino, what would the title of that book be?
If I was writing a book about Bruno?
Yeah, what would the title be?
Oh, God.
That's a good one.
Yeah,
to a lot of us. Yeah.
Oh, man. God, that's something you got to think about, Bill.
Okay. All right. That's why I asked a tough question.
Yeah, it's a good one. I mean, I don't know where to start. I'm brain dead. Alzheimer's.
No, you're not that old. So as a Bruno fan, when you watched his matches, even from backstage or when you were a kid, are there one or two opponents that stand out of great matches of Bruno Sammartino?
Well, when I was a kid, there was a couple of them that were, big at the time and wild and crazy, because one of his opponents was George Steele.
Yes, nice.
And George, 300 pounds, scary looking guy, hair all over his body.
Looked like a gorilla. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
I have a picture of him somewhere here.
And he was one of the favorite ones I'd like to.
Larry, hang
watch.
on. Larry, hang on a sec. I just happen to have, this is weird, a photo that he autographed to my son Brandon when he was at a minor league baseball game. So in case you people don't know what George the Animal Steele looked like, this was him. Okay, so go ahead. Tell us about Bruno against George Steele.
Well, I'd watched Bruno versus Steele, and one time Steele was coming back to the dressing room after the match, and I was like a kid, and I had a handful of sweethearts, and I threw it at him, and they bounced all up over his head. I bounced off his head, and he turned and took a step to me, and me and my buddies fell down trying to get the hell out of there so fast, scared to death. And then one time on the studio wrestling, I'll never forget this. George was going to wrestle the Bear.
Ted, that was who brought the bear? Ted, what was his name? Ted Dubois.
You know what? We called him the Bear Man. I think his name was Dubois.
Dubois, yes, yeah.
And so the Bear Man was there with his bear, going to wrestle George Steele. So they got the bear in the ring. George comes out and he's doing his thing, and he starts getting in the ring. Just as he does, the bear squats and starts taking a big dump. Right in the ring on live TV. And George now is seeing this, and there's no way he's going in the ring with this big lump of dump. So he starts running around, he grabs the microphone, and he says, "I'm not getting in the ring with no bear that has no couth and no class." And he leaves. I never forgot that.
That was I know we're supposed to be talking about Bruno, but my George story was, do you remember the old Albany Armory?
Which one?
Albany, New York Armory.
Oh, yeah.
So there was an area there where everybody parked their cars. And a 7 or 8 year old kid got into that area. And I was standing there chatting with George Steele when he was out of character. And he saw this kid. And George took this huge lead pipe and jumped up on top of a car, looked this kid in the eyes, went, "You go! Hey, you!" And he threw the pipe. And I never saw anyone so terrified in my life. This was George Steele.
When you talk about guys like George Steele and Billy Graham and Ivan Koloff, and you also got to realize this: these guys became stars because they wrestled Bruno.
Right, you're right.
And that's how big he was, where they would get these guys in, and if you could work your way up to wrestle Bruno and draw money, you became a star. Did
Bruno talk to you about the days when he was kind of getting tired of being on the road and his body was aching, and he, the title was already kind of like, I don't know if I can keep doing this?
Well, he was pretty beat up, nothing serious, but his elbows wouldn't straighten out, his back, he broke his neck down the road.
Yes.
But and then they're being at home. But that's when he, started cutting back where. And it worked out good to keep him, on top longer, because he wouldn't get burned out. I mean, you wouldn't see Bruno wrestle on TV, and he wouldn't be in the house shows during the week. But he'd wrestle maybe once a week or a few times a month at the big venues. But that's what kept the big venues selling out, because that's we had to go to see Bruno.
Yeah. What about his broadcaster days? Did you talk with him a lot during that time?
The what?
His broadcaster days, the days he was.
Well, not too much then, because I was so busy on the road.
Yeah.
And back in those days, there was no cell phones. So it wasn't like you could, call at your convenience.
Yeah, you had to go to a payphone.
Yeah.
And you had to have change. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. What about some of his other, he always told me that the two guys that because I have hours of audio tapes on him, and he always told me about two guys that he loved wrestling against. One was Bobby Duncombe, and the other was Ken Patera.
Oh, you like both those guys?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, and Ken was very good. I mean, plus he had the Olympic background. the powerlifting. So Bruno really respected that, you know.
What about Bobby Duncombe?
Oh yeah, he liked Bobby Duncan.
Yeah.
Bobby Duncan, he was a workhorse, and for a big guy, he could, you know, do good things.
I used to love
Bruno into it.
how Bruno said his name. He'd go, you know, this Duncombe. He used to call him Duncombe. He
Yeah.
always did that. Bruno's coming back to the WWE and with you at the Hall of Fame. Tell us about that.
What was it? I heard some crackling. Bruno in the Hall of Fame?
Bruno and you in the Hall of Fame. Yeah.
Oh, and Bruno went in the garden?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you know, for years, you know, Bruno would have some disagreements with the upper echelon.
Sure did.
And then it got to the point where everybody wanted him to be in the Hall of Fame. And yeah, I think he always wanted to be in. But the way Bruno was, his work was in his contract. And then after Bruno would say some things for a few years, he figured if he did go in the Hall of Fame, it would make him look like a hypocrite.
Yeah.
So he didn't want to do that for that reason for a while. And then Triple H, you know, had a talk with me and asked me if I'd help him out and get Bruno to go in the Hall of Fame in the Garden, because the Garden would be the perfect place.
The home of Bruno, yeah.
Yeah, it's the perfect place. And I knew it too. And so I started talking to Bruno and kind of motivated him. He started talking to other people like a Dr. Maroon in Pittsburgh and some other people he knew.
I was just going to bring that name up.
Yeah, but Bruno realized that the WWE has become a great company. I mean, it's an awesome company in terms of, you know, guys, the talent, the employees, the jobs, the entertainment. If you get hurt, they'll take care of you.
Sure.
If you get problems, they'll take care of you. You know, and when Bruno realized, you know, what a great company it was, and he had no more hesitation. I mean, he was proud to be in the Hall of Fame.
I know, and like you mentioned, that the last time both you and I saw him was at the Hall of Fame 2017, and he had his son Daryl with him, and Danucci was there as well, and he just looked so happy and so classy.
Oh yeah, he really enjoyed going to the WrestleMania.
Yeah, and what was wonderful is when I saw small fans, kids, going up to him, and they knew who he was.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. I mean, I'm amazed how many young people know who I am.
Yeah, well, okay. Well, you were the living legend until.
Well, yeah, they were all. I'm over YouTube and the network and that stuff, and they're into that. So God bless them, you know.
Yeah, that's the beautiful thing, is that for people who don't understand what the old quote unquote back in the day was like, the WWE network, $9.99, is so well worth what you're paying for it, to go back and see what the business looks like today, where it came from, what the infancy was. But when you look at people who were great champions and really epitomized what a champion athlete should look like, that was Bruno Sammartino, right, Larry?
Oh yeah. You know, it's amazing. I mean, I hate to say it and sound stupid, but for $9.99, including all the pay-per-views and the whole history, the footage they have from the 60s, 70s, it's ridiculous. That's what they charge more.
Yeah, so did I. And, you know, people don't understand that before the sports entertainment facet came into pro wrestling, that there was no musical intros and there wasn't 20-minute interviews. It was totally different. You guys went in, you did your interviews at the ringside, and you went in and you fought each other.
Yeah. You know what I used to like too is when we came out of the dressing room to the ring, a big event.
Say that again, Larry. Oh, I think Larry, did we lose you? I think we may have lost Larry ZBYSZKO here on the phone. Let's check it out. And it's not my battery. I'm plugged in here, so I hope his battery didn't go kaboom. Hold on here. This is live TV, folks, or live internet, whatever you want to call it.
Well, there you go. I'm shooting my mouth off, and no one heard me.
I know. Where did you go?
I don't know. you were there, and then your thing disconnected me. But I heard crackling.
I don't know what that was. Maybe we're being yes, maybe we're being cracked here. I don't know. But we're talking about, but back in those days, when you would come out to the ring, what were you going to say for that?
Well, in those days, no music, no fireworks. But we came out and we were surrounded by police. And when you walked out like that, it made you look like you were important, like you were a somebody. And it makes it easier for the fans to believe, So I used to like that. But when I see it watch it on the network, the old footage, it looks like a professional boxing match. I mean, it's easy to believe in.
Yeah, no, it was great because I always equated when people would yell out at the large crowds for Muhammad Ali, 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 Boombaye. When Bruno came out, that's what Bruno got too.
Oh.
Bruno. And I'm telling you, it was so hard for me shooting pictures there to not react to the exciting matches that he had with so many of them opponents. And by the way, now that I've got you on here, I do want to reprimand you for several times you kicked Bruno out of the ring right onto me and George Napolitano and the other photographers, thus injuring our cameras and our bodies.
Well, that's Bruno's fault to send him to hang on, not me.
You know what? When he was kicked out of the ring, he came out with a velocity that I couldn't believe how it just took all of the photography crew over. But I loved photographing his matches, and your matches against him were just classic. And you were never satisfied. You were always, when you came out and you were yelling at Bruno, you'd stop that match and start yelling at the people for supporting Bruno.
Oh, God, yeah. I was an asshole.
So, yeah, well, character-wise, not as. So before I let you go, and I don't want to let this go. Before I let you go, we lost another wrestler yesterday, Paul Jones. Did you know Paul Jones?
Yeah, someone told me that. Oh, yeah, I knew Paul Jones back in the days when I was doing NWA stuff.
Yeah. Tell
He's
us.
A nice guy. I didn't know him that well, but he's a nice guy.
I remember he came to Madison Square Garden, and he talked about how people knew him from the magazines. But the biggest thing that I remember in a story of him, and I was mentioning this before we got you on the phone, was he was the guy, if I remember right, that took the Florida Championship belt and went on the bridge and threw it into Tampa Bay.
Maybe.
Do you remember that?
I don't. You know what? I that's lost in the dead brain cells.
You didn't read the magazines. You didn't read the magazine.
Yeah, hell no.
Tell everybody what you're doing these days, Larry.
Well, I'm open a little bit, and the performance center's right down the road, so I can go down here and set some knowledge, and they don't kick me out. They've been very nice.
That's nice.
And just kind of watching the world go around, Bill. You know what? It's weird how things happen. They always say it happens in threes.
Yeah.
And even with the boys, it always seems to happen. And I was thinking about it, and then we had Johnny Valiant.
Yes.
And then Bruno, and then Paul Jones. That's the three of them.
Johnny Valiant, and he was on my list to talk to you about, so I'm glad you brought him up. Tragic accident that happened with him, and he was a Pittsburgh boy too.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I knew John right when he first started, and I didn't start yet, but I knew John well. We worked with him a lot. Italian brothers, me and Tony.
They were the Valiant brothers. Johnny, Jimmy, and Jerry, and Captain Lou were quite a group.
Yeah, they were great, and for a while they were hot. When they first started, they were hot. They were classics on the road. I mean, it's amazing they weren't locked up.
Well, if the internet was around back then, half the guys, and I used to say this about the Rat Pack too, they'd all be in jail.
Oh, it was that should be a movie.
Yeah, the Johnny Valiant had an incredible sense of humor. I saw his stand-up act once.
He was a funny guy. He'd always imitate everybody.
Yes, Yeah.
Remember that? He'd imitate everybody. George Steele, me, Bruno. He talked just like him.
Well, you know, one of his heroes, because when I saw his act, he reminded me there was an old school comedian who was about 500 pounds. His name was Jackie Leonard. And Johnny Valiant used to, he used to talk like this, let me tell you something, you little cocker. That was exactly, and I used to say Jackie Leonard, right? And he really liked Jackie Leonard. But he started off in wrestling as John L. Sullivan when I first saw him.
Yeah.
He was a good guy.
Yeah.
And he was going to be one of Bruno's proteges.
Yeah.
But it wound up, it didn't happen, but he became once he hooked on with Jimmy Valiant and Captain Lou, boy, they took the world by storm.
Yeah, no, they were good and they were over.
I have a classic audio interview I haven't run yet of the dream date that we did, Win a Dream Date with the Valiant Brothers. We did that in the magazines, and I have a 3 or 4 minute audio tape on that with Johnny on that. I'm going to run that in a week or two. Larry ZBYSZKO, I want to thank you so much. And before we finally wrap up, what would you like to say to the people who loved Bruno Sammartino so much?
Well, I just want to say that I know how he feels because he was just a special guy, and he'll be missed. Yeah. I don't believe that I Bruno's number on my phone, but I can't call it because he won't be there.
Yeah. We'll miss you, Bruno Sammartino. Larry ZBYSZKO, I always say I love you, and thank you for all your professionalism with me. All the times I needed you to pose for me or do an interview. You were actually my first guest on WTBS when Ole Anderson was the booker. And Craig Peters and I came down there to do Pro Wrestling Illustrated press conferences, and we sat at a table and interviewed you. And you could have sat there for 2 days. We had such a good time. Yeah. So
I was blessed with the gift of gab. I was full of bullshit.
You were. But I want to thank you for your professionalism and for your friendship all these years too.
Well, you too, Bill.
And as Bruno, right? And as Bruno would have said, ZBYSZKO, doggone you. Larry ZBYSZKO here with Bill Apter. Thank you, Larry.
All right. I talk to you soon, Bill.
Oh man, I miss you, Bruno. Again, this is a special issue of the Bill Apter magazine. Not doing much interaction today, but I do want to go back to talking about Paul Jones. Paul Jones, I met him first in Florida when he did that whole thing with throwing the Florida State Championship into the Tampa Bay. I remember that. Then through the years of Jim Crockett Promotions, I photographed him. He was both a manager, a wrestler. He was a great guy. He brought me to his home many times with his son, Paul Jr., and his wife at that time, Linda. He was a very classy guy, Broadway Paul Jones, and he was always very thankful to the magazines. As I mentioned, when he came to Madison Square Garden, he said to me, I had dinner with him, and he said, I'm amazed that people knew who I was because of the magazines. So I want to see if I can get one other person on the line here. Hang on a minute. Because he was calling me a few minutes ago. And this is my pal, Sal. So let me see if I can get Sal on the phone. Sal was very close to Bruno Sammartino.
Hey, Bill.
Hey, we're on live, Sal, on my weekly magazine show, and I just finished talking with Larry ZBYSZKO, and I didn't want to let this hour get away without talking to my pal Sal, who is an entire chapter in my book, and through the years, he and I shared many hours and memories with Bruno Sammartino. Hey, Sal.
Hello, sir.
Sal was the guy who called me with the horrible news yesterday morning, and it's still just hard to believe. And Sal, I want to thank you for calling me and letting me know.
Yeah, we go back a long way, Bill, and I know how you felt about Bruno, and you certainly went back a long way about him. And you and I think J.J. Dillon were two of the first people that came to my mind upon hearing this horrible news. I think it's the closest thing to going into shock I've ever experienced.
You and me both. Just like you, I couldn't focus on anything. Tell us about the first time you not met Bruno, but the first time you ever saw a wrestling match with Bruno Sammartino.
Well, my first live wrestling match, actually, before I really knew much of anything, I just started watching the business, watching wrestling a short time before. I would believe I was in the 11th grade or the 10th grade, and it was the Shea Stadium match with Larry Zbyszko in the cage.
Wow, what a first match.
Yeah, through the kindness of a gentleman that was a New York State Athletic Commission referee that my cousin knew, we had an opportunity to go to the show in Shea Stadium, and I went, and Bruno and I discussed that many times, and discussed it with Larry Zbyszko, many times as well. But it was quite a thrill for me to be at that event, and through the years become very close to so many that starred on that show.
Yeah. Were you we just had Larry on for a half hour, so you can admit this now. Were you a Zbyszko hater back then?
Of course. I mean, I was all for the good guys. But actually, Bill, on the night that I first met you, I met Larry Zbyszko earlier that night by the back door there, 33rd and 8th at Madison Square Garden, where my guy Dan Bruno used to be the security guard down there.
Wow. Now tell us about the first time you got to meet Bruno Sammartino.
Well, through our mutual friend Blackjack Brown, who used to run a phone line that Bruno was the guest on.
Oh, right, the 900 number. The 900 number, right?
Right. Through that, Bruno was a guest, and I was at that time I was doing a lot of traveling as a referee from territories, Puerto Rico, AWA, things like that, and Blackjack liked to have me on the line to help keep conversation going and so forth. And I got to talking to Bruno throughout that process. And then another friend of ours, Joel Goodhart, had asked me if I would talk to Bruno and come to one of his shows, and have Bruno managed David against Larry Zbyszko, who was the AWA champion at the time, with Paul Heyman in the other corner.
Right.
And I was able to convince Bruno to do that, and from there, it brings us all the way through to his final appearance that we did together at the big event in New York.
And you brought him to Wrestle Reunion. Sal, by the way, beside being doing everything in wrestling, from refereeing, putting up rings, everything, was the guy who invented and brought everybody to Wrestle Reunion together. And thank you very much publicly for letting me host those events.
Well, it was a lot of appreciation to you and Diamond Dallas Page, and getting Bruno to come was not an easy task. I think anybody who really has followed Bruno knows that he doesn't really travel, or did not really travel outside of Pittsburgh in the winter months. But as always, he made accommodations for me that I can't explain why. And he did agree to come down to Tampa in January, and luckily the weather cooperated in Pittsburgh for him to not have any problems with that. And I certainly always appreciated when, for whatever reason, he did things for me that he would not entertain for anyone else. I don't know why I deserve these things. I can't say I questioned it, but I question it, but I was always appreciative and accepted.
When was the last time you spoke with him?
Well, as you know, Bill, I've been rewriting his book.
Yes.
And we've been working on the editing between myself and Colin Bowman, used to be WCW Magazine.
Great guy.
And I spoke to Bruno, I guess, a couple of months ago, and we talked for quite a while on things to add into the book, and so we could pretty much finish up. And after that, but it was a normal conversation. We just went through things like we've been doing for 20 years, and I just figured I'd talk to him again soon. And unfortunately, I did not have that opportunity again. I think we spoke regularly for years and years, weekly, every other week, sometimes multiple times in the same week, sometimes multiple times in the same day. He's been, quite honestly, a major part of my life for a very long time. And, those of us who knew him well are all stunned. Stan Hansen called late last night, of course, and, wanting to hear, whatever there was to say. And, certainly the trust in him and Bruno were very, very close. And,
sure. It's that close-knit era that we were all a part of, that everyone's just bonded in this, and Bruno was the king of it. Yeah.
For sure. I mean, yes, let's face it, yesterday was a horrible day. After dealing with this all day, then getting the word at night that Paul Jones had passed away, and pretty much I had to text Stan Hansen that news immediately, because it was like just a few minutes after we hung up the phone that I got the word about Paul. And I again advised J.J. Dillon, of course, who worked with Paul for so many years. And so yesterday was probably one of the worst days that I've experienced, and I can't even explain.
Yeah, and they say it happens in threes, and Larry and I were just talking about Johnny Valiant as well very recently. So it's terrible. Let's get past these days, but Bruno will always be such a strong force in our minds and our hearts. He will be, especially since, like you, I grew up in this Northeast area where wrestling and Bruno Sammartino were synonymous. You couldn't say one without the other.
Correct. Obviously, that's an absolute fact. And, I don't know how long it'll take me to get my hands wrapped around this. This is not going to be an easy thing, but Bruno was a different individual. Quite honestly, he didn't understand his fame. He really believed that being off television and wrestling on a regular basis, that people wouldn't know him, but yet anywhere we went, people knew him, and people of all ages knew him. It wasn't just people from his era. It was young kids. It was pretty much anybody. But he was such a humble man, and did what he could. Tried to accommodate the fans in the best way possible.
He always did. Yeah.
He was a pleasure to have around. The one thing that I think about under these conditions is, for the world to have had Bruno Sammartino the way that we did, it was, of course, Carol and his children that had to, not have him for the amount of time. And that's the only reason why Bruno didn't want to make appearances anymore. He just really, truthfully enjoyed being home with his wife and his grandchildren and his boys. And that's just the truth. For those of us who have been traveling, travel can get old, but Bruno just enjoyed that time with his family. And so I appreciated any time when he came out to do things. And he had tough times on the road as far as, he didn't sleep. If I had to go get him in a room in the morning, if we were supposed to meet at 7:30, he'd probably already been up by 5 and looking out the window to see what, it's just for our last appearance, we both ended up in the lobby of the hotel at, I think, 5 a.m. We're just sitting there waiting to have somewhere to go. That's just the way it is.
I know
with Bruno. He just wasn't comfortable anymore on the sleeping away from home. Obviously, younger days he did, but later in life, he just wanted to be home in his own bed.
Sal, just like you, I'm going to miss him in my mind and in my heart. I want to thank you. I know I just called you out of nowhere. We're just wrapping the show up here, and I didn't want to wrap anything up without some words from you. My pal,
I
Sal.
appreciate it. And Bill, I sent you a text a little while ago, so you need to look at that.
I will. I already did. Thank you,
Okay.
Sal.
Yep.
Sal Carenti, one of my dearest friends, and from the days he was a fan through Wrestle Reunion and so much more. We're going to wrap up right now. We'll be back to our regular format next Thursday night, our regular magazine format with rankings and gossip and all this. Bruno Sammartino, Paul Jones, Johnny Valiant, rest your souls. Bill Apter will see you at the matches.